An object tracked by the USS Princeton's SPY-1 radar system displaced 60 miles in 2 seconds. On November 14, 2004, a calculated velocity of 108,000 miles per hour, 49 times the documented maximum of the SR-71 Blackbird, with 0 propulsion signature, 0 in-flight exhaust, and 0 sonic event. That single data point, logged by the most advanced naval radar platform in the U.S. surface fleet, exists in the official record. It has never been formally explained. Buried within the Princeton's own sensor logs from the 2 weeks preceding that intercept is a classified notation that would not appear in any public disclosure for another 17 years, until a former compartmented access intelligence officer named David Grush cited it under congressional oath as corroborating evidence for a retrieval program the government had never acknowledged. That notation is the thread this investigation follows to its end. Commander David Fravor was born in 1964. By November of 2004, he had accumulated over 3,500 documented flight hours in naval aviation, including combat deployments. He commanded Strike Fighter Squadron 41. He was, by every professional metric in the service record, a precise observer trained to distinguish between atmospheric artifact and physical threat. He had no documented history of anomalous reporting. He was not an excitable man. He was 6 minutes from completing a routine training exercise when the Princeton vectored him toward coordinates approximately 100 miles southwest of San Diego, where its SPY-1 system had been logging daily anomalous contacts for 14 consecutive days. The contacts appeared at altitudes above 80,000 feet, then descended to approximately 20,000 feet within time, intervals inconsistent with any propulsion system in the documented U.S. or foreign military inventory. No radar cross-section, no infrared signature, no communications frequency. The Princeton's operators had been logging it. On November 14th, they decided to investigate. Fravor arrives at the designated coordinates at approximately 15,000 feet. Below him, a section of disturbed white water roughly the size of a Boeing 737 churns the surface. Above it, at approximately 50 feet altitude, a white object holds position. It is approximately 40 feet in length. It has no wings, no visible propulsion exhaust, no tail structure. It is moving in an erratic lateral pattern above the water disturbance. Not random movement, but the movement profile of a platform, maintaining observational focus on the anomaly below it. Fravor initiates a controlled intercept spiral, descending toward the object. The object responds. It accelerates toward his aircraft, breaks off the approach vector, then repositions. He attempts to cut off its escape geometry. The object is gone. Not fast in any conventional sense. Instantaneous. The Princeton's SPY-1 reacquires it 60 miles away within 2 seconds. The radar log timestamps that displacement. That log was not classified. It was simply not publicized for 13 years. That gap documented event in 2004, public disclosure in 2017, is the first structural data point in the pattern this investigation documents. It is not the longest such gap in the record. The term unidentified flying object was not generated by civilian culture or press shorthand. It was coined in 1951 by Captain Edward Ruppelt, the director of Project Blue Book, the United States Air Force's official aerial anomaly investigation program. Ruppelt created the designation specifically to remove cultural noise from the analytical process and establish a neutral, descriptive operational category. Between 1947 and 1969, Project Blue Book logged 12,618 reported sightings. Of those, 701 were formally classified as unidentified following examination, meaning Air Force analysts reviewed the cases, applied available methodology, and could not attribute them to any known aircraft, atmospheric phenomenon, or observational error. 701 cases. That figure was released publicly. The classified annex was not. It has not been fully released as of the date of this production. The program was terminated in December of 1969 following the Condon Report, a study commissioned by the Air Force and conducted at the University of Colorado under physicist Edward Condon. The report concluded that continued investigation of aerial anomalies was unlikely to yield findings of scientific value. What the report did not disclose at publication was that Condon had authored a memorandum to his team at the project's outset, stating that the study's conclusion had been predetermined and that the team's function was to produce documentation supporting it. That memorandum was released by a project staff member and is now a matter of public record. The Condon Report's conclusion was not the product of open scientific inquiry. It was the product of a predetermined institutional outcome rendered in empirical language. The program was terminated not because the phenomenon had been resolved, but because the investigation had become operationally inconvenient. That is not characterization. That is the documented sequence of events. In the years surrounding Project Blue Book's operation, a graduate student in astrophysics at the University of Arizona named James McDonald began conducting independent case analysis on sighting reports from pilots, military personnel, and civilian witnesses. McDonald held a doctorate and was employed as a senior research scientist. He was not a hobbyist. He became convinced, after reviewing several hundred cases, that the phenomenon was real, physical, and not attributable to any human program identifiable in the available record. He testified before Congress in 1968, presented documented case files, named witnesses, and challenged the Air Force's methodology directly. The institutional response was a sustained campaign of professional discrediting, the specifics of which McDonald documented in correspondence now archived at the University of Arizona Library. McDonald experienced a self-inflicted incident in 1971. His case files were transferred to the university archive. They have not been fully digitized. The behavioral sequence, documented investigator, corroborated evidence, institutional suppression, professional destruction, appears with sufficient frequency across the 77-year span of this record to constitute an observed pattern of consistent institutional containment preference. Not a conspiracy in the coordination sense. A policy in the operational culture sense. Those are structurally different categories, and conflating them is among the most common analytical errors applied to this subject. The physical evidence record is where that containment preference begins to structurally fail. In July of 1947, Mac Brazel, a ranch foreman operating approximately 75 miles north of Roswell, New Mexico, identified debris scattered across a field he managed. The debris field extended approximately 3/4 of a mile in length and several hundred feet in width. The recovered material included metallic foil, exhibiting shape memory properties, returning to original geometry after deformation, not exhibited by any metallic alloy in documented production at that time. It included structural numbers composed of a material lighter than balsa wood that resisted cutting, burning, and deformation by available tools. Brazel brought samples to the local sheriff, who contacted Roswell Army Airfield. The Air Force issued a press release on July 8, 1947, stating that personnel from the 509th Bomb Group had recovered a flying disc. That press release exists in the documented record. It was issued by Lieutenant Walter Hott under authorization of Base Commander Colonel William Blanchard. Within 24 hours, a second release retracted the first and attributed the material to a weather balloon. The retraction was issued from 8th Air Force Headquarters in Fort Worth, 2 command levels above Blanchard, by Brigadier General Roger Ramey. Ramey posed for photographs holding foil and rubber material consistent with a weather balloon. Decades later, photographic enhancement analysis of those images identified a document in Ramey's hand. The partially legible text contained the words victims and in the disc. The retraction memo and the original material occupied the same room simultaneously. The recovered material was transferred to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, home of the Air Materiel Command's Foreign Technology Evaluation Division. Multiple personnel who handled or observed the material at Wright-Patterson provided documented testimony prior to passing, including Major Jesse Marcel, the 509th Bomb Group's intelligence officer, who held one of the highest security clearances in the U.S. military at that time as the intelligence officer for the only nuclear-capable bomb group in existence. Marcel stated on camera that what he recovered was not consistent with any material or structural form he had encountered in over 15 years of military service. His description aligned with Brazel's description. Neither individual had a documented motive for fabrication. Neither individual recanted. In November of 1986, Japan Airlines Flight 1628, a 747 cargo aircraft operating between Paris and Tokyo, is passing over Alaska at 35,000 feet. Captain Kenju Terauchi observes 3 objects in formation with the aircraft. 2 are smaller objects operating in coordinated pattern ahead of the 747. The third is a large structured form. Terauchi estimates it as exceeding the combined length of 2 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, maintaining a position below and behind the 747. The encounter is tracked by Federal Aviation Administration ground radar. FIA Air Traffic Control at Anchorage logs real-time radio contact with Terauchi and records his reports as they occur. The contact lasts 31 minutes of continuous radar tracking. The FIA's own subsequent investigation confirms the radar returns is genuine. The case report, obtained through FOIA litigation, runs to several hundred pages. Its documented conclusion: the objects were real, the returns were valid, no explanation was identified. FAA Air Traffic Division Director John Callahan stated publicly after retirement that CIA personnel attended a post-incident briefing, instructed all present to treat the encounter as classified, and stated it had not occurred. Callahan had retained copies of the radar data prior to that instruction. In December of 2017, the New York Times confirmed the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a classified DOD program operating from 2007 to 2012 under a $22 million budget secured by Senator Harry Reid. The program was directed by Luis Elizondo, a career intelligence officer who resigned his position in 2017, citing excessive institutional obstruction preventing adequate investigation. Elizondo testified and stated publicly that the program had documented, before its defunding, 5 performance characteristics consistent across multiple confirmed encounters. Instantaneous acceleration with no inertial effect on the platform. Hypersonic velocity, generating no sonic boom and no thermal signature. Low observability across radar and infrared sensor systems. Transmedium operation, meaning movement through both atmosphere and water without structural adaptation or speed reduction. And positive lift without any aerodynamic surface. 5 characteristics. Consistent across multiple sensor platforms, multiple military branches, multiple decades of documentation. No known human-produced aircraft exhibits any single one of those 5 characteristics. The documented objects exhibited all 5 simultaneously. The Navy pilot operating the targeting system during the FLIR-1 encounter, one of 3 videos officially released by the Pentagon in April of 2020 as authenticated U.S. Navy recordings of unidentified aerial phenomena, describes watching the object perform a repositioning maneuver that precedes his control input, not reactive movement. Anticipatory. The object moves before the pilot's adjustment alters his flight path. The flight data overlaid on the FLIR-1 recording confirms the object's movement profile cannot be attributed to sensor artifact, lens distortion, atmospheric refraction, or camera parallax error. The Pentagon confirms the recordings are authentic. The Pentagon confirms they do not know what the objects are. That is not a denial. It is a documented confirmation of an explanatory gap within the full classified and unclassified knowledge base of the most comprehensively resourced military intelligence apparatus in human history. In June of 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary assessment of a UAP phenomena covering 144 military reported incidents between 2004 and 2021. Of those 144 cases, 143 remained unresolved. One was attributed to a deflating balloon. The report did not attribute any of the remaining 143 to any known U.S. program, any identified foreign program, or any atmospheric or astronomical phenomenon. The Senate Intelligence Committee's classified annex to the same legislation that established the UAP task force contained language requiring that any government program involving UAP retrieval or reverse engineering operations be reported to designated oversight committees. Classified legislative language is not drafted to address hypothetical program categories. In July of 2023, David Grush testified before the House Oversight Subcommittee on National Security. Grush held a top-secret SCI clearance with additional compartmented access authorizations. He had served as a representative to the UAP task force and as a senior officer at both the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. He testified under oath with the legal exposure that sworn. Congressional testimony carries that the United States government had been in possession of craft of non-human origin retrieved over a period of decades through a program operating outside congressional oversight. He stated that individuals with documented knowledge of these programs had been subjected to institutional pressure and, in some cases, subjected to coercive measures to prevent disclosure. He stated he was prepared to provide specific operational details in a classified session. The Department of Defense response was a statement that it held no verifiable information corroborating his claims, not that the claims were false, not that no such program existed, that they held no verifiable information. The classified annex cited by Grush, the one containing the specific censor notation from the Princeton's 2-week tracking log that opened this investigation, has not been released. The breadcrumb was planted at the beginning. The Princeton logged something for 14 days before the Fravor intercept. That pre-intercept sensor data, referenced in Grush's classified testimony as one of several corroborating data chains within the unreleased program documentation, represents the connective tissue between a 2004 naval encounter and a 2023 sworn disclosure. The public record contains the intercept. The classified record, by Grush's account under oath, contains the context that explains why the intercept was not an isolated event, but the documented endpoint of a 2-week observation sequence that someone, at some command level, had already been tracking with full situational awareness before Fravor was ever vectored toward those coordinates. That sequence, pre-awareness, vectored intercept, 13-year suppression, partial disclosure, classified corroboration, is not consistent with an institution that was surprised by what its radar found on November 14, 2004. It is consistent with an institution that already knew what was there, needed a documented pilot intercept for reasons that have not been disclosed, and managed the resulting record accordingly for over a decade. The documented record does not establish what these objects are. It establishes, with the evidentiary weight of declassified programs, authenticated sensor data, officially released video, and sworn congressional testimony, that they are real, that their performance characteristics are not attributable to any known human or natural source, and that a consistent institutional effort to contain public awareness of that fact has been operating continuously since at least 1947. The 5 performance characteristics Elizondo documented: instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity without thermal signature, low observability, transmedium operation, positive lift without aerodynamic surface, have appeared in the record from Roswell to Nimitz to the FLI R1 release without variation. across 77 years, across multiple sensor systems, across multiple countries, across witnesses whose professional profiles and institutional positions made fabrication operationally costly and motivationally incoherent. The dataset is not ambiguous. The explanation is, given that those 5 performance characteristics have been documented consistently across platforms, sensor types, and a 77-year operational span, what specific declassification threshold should the next institutional review establish before the program record can be considered adequately disclosed?